Welcome back by the fireside. Tonight I want to ask a question that has followed me since childhood. You cannot tell me that in every other classroom there is a child like me, musically gifted, dramatically inclined, emotionally intelligent, creative beyond measure. And then somehow by adulthood, they evaporate. Where did they go? And why does nobody ask? I'm not just talking about effeminate boys. Yes, we were obvious, we were easy to see, easy to mock, easy to discipline, but we were not alone. There were tomboy girls, there were gender-nonconforming children before we even had the language. There were quiet queer geniuses in science labs. There were girls who refused dresses and were punished for it. There were boys who refused aggression and were punished for that. We were a constellation of brilliance. So how does brilliance disappear? Now it's different. We have social media, we have visibility, we have queer people posting, living, thriving, sometimes. But even that visibility is negotiated. People block their families to be free online. People live double lives. People curate their queerness inside safe circles. People measure who sees what. Visibility is still conditional. And growing up, we had nothing. No mentors, no elders saying, I survived this. No visible lineage, no flamboyant adults standing in front of us saying, you will not disappear. So we grew up thinking we were anomalies, and that loneliness shapes you. It teaches you to shrink before anyone even asks. It teaches you that adulthood requires disappearance. As I grew older and as I became visible in film, theater, music, art, I realized something else. I was not invisible. In many spaces, I was one of the most visible, effeminate men of my time. And still, the pressure came. Be this, don't do that. Stay here, don't go there. Do this activism, don't say that part. Be visible, but manageable. Be talented, but not disruptive. Be queer, but not political. Be expressive, but not powerful. Be grateful, not critical. And I kept thinking, if I'm visible and still being pressured to shrink, what happened to the ones before me? Did they shrink? Were they silenced? Did they assimilate to survive? Did they get tired? Did they decide access was more important than confrontation? Did they disappear on purpose? Or were they buried? because I know I'm not the first, and yet every space reacts like I am. Why does every generation feel like the experiment? Now let me talk about something else. There is a pattern in my life. I go into spaces quietly. I do not go looking for conflict. I do not go trying to disrupt anything. I go because I'm invited, because I'm accepted into a residency, because I'm there to practice arts, to teach, to inspire. I mind my business. I'm very private, and yet somehow every space I enter begins to surface problems. It feels ridiculous because I'm not problematic, but I walk into rooms and something shifts. Secrets surface, power structures get exposed, tensions rise, people test boundaries, and then I become the problem. I remember being in Vasa, Finland, and for the first time feeling something I had never felt before in community. Peace. Everything was running smoothly. No tension, no hostility, no strange undercurrents. I remember telling someone close to me at the time, this is the first time I've been in community and nothing has gone wrong. I was shocked. I was excited. I thought maybe this time would be different. It didn't take long. People infiltrated my personal space sexually. Creepy behavior, boundary violations, things that made my skin crawl. I had to cut the entire community off. And what followed in Helsinki was worse. Connected, escalated. When patterns repeat like that, when you walk in peacefully and leave destabilized, the toll it takes on your mind is too real. And what makes it heavier is when elders are present, watching, knowing, and saying nothing. We use the word elder loosely, but elderhood is not age. It is not proximity to Europe. It is not access. It is not panels. It is not reputation. It is not branding. Elderhood is responsibility. If you went through something, you prepare the next person. If you endured racism, you warn the next person. If you survived homophobia in certain spaces, you explain how it operates. If you know institutions close ranks, instead of accountability, you do not send younger people in blind. Especially into institutions and places we are conditioned or likely to trust as colonized people living in colonized minds and bodies seeking audience, refuge, or solace. When that does not happen, something is broken. And when I say elderhood failed us, I'm not saying there were no elders. I'm saying the spectrum is wider than we admit. There are protective elders. They prepare you before you travel. They tell you what Europe really is, not the brochure version. They explain how racism hides inside progressive language. They warn you about sexual politics in artistic communities. They tell you how institutions close ranks. They tell you what happened to them. They reduce your danger before it reaches you. They are rare. Then there are survival elders. They endured colonial morality. They endured criminalization. They endured church discipline. They endured donor dependency. They survived by shrinking, by code, by saying less. Survival is not shameful, but survival alone is not mentorship, because survival elders give half warnings. Be careful, but not what to be careful of. Be strategic, but not what strategy costs them. So you walk in half prepared, and half prepared is still vulnerable. Then there are elders who protect access over people. Elders who calculate the cost of intervention. If I speak, I lose funding. If I speak, I lose invitations. If I speak, I lose entry. So they stay silent. Silence becomes alignment. Sometimes they narrow you. Focus on this issue. Stay in your lane. Tone it down. Be grateful. Not because you are wrong, but because you are inconvenient. Because your refusal destabilizes arrangements they made to survive. And that is where elderhood mutates. Not in cartoon villainy, into calculation. And calculation without courage becomes complicity. Colonialism did not just criminalize queerness, it restructured authority. It made respectability the currency of survival. To survive, many had to split their lives in two. Publicly one thing, privately another. Public elderhood never fully formed. It went underground into whispers. And whispers do not build lineage. Then NGOs arrived. Visibility became conditional. Be the acceptable queer, be the grateful beneficiary, be the diversity statistic, be the HIV advocate, but not the systemic critic. Be the artist, but not the whistleblower. Access reshapes people, and preservation of access can quietly override protection of people. Sometimes the one who refuses grooming becomes the scapegoat. Sometimes the one who refuses to shrink becomes the site where systems push back. They absorb backlash, isolation, narrative distortion. And when exposure becomes risk, institutions adjust, policies appear, language shifts, people soften, and no one names who paid the cost of that shift. Sometimes the scapegoat saves the community, and the community moves forward without acknowledging it. Elderhood should interrupt that cycle. Elderhood should say, this person is not the problem, the pattern is. But when elderhood is compromised by fear or access, that interruption never happens. Queer community is not just artists. It is not just panels. It is not just visibility. We cater to everyone. We do not quench the light of anyone, no matter how threatened you feel in your so-called eldership. It is good to give less privileged queer people a purpose. It is good to nurture talent, but grooming them to be visible while leaving them vulnerable, leaving them exposed to predators, to exploitation, to trafficking-like dynamics, to sexual manipulation, that is not community. That is cult behavior. Community protects, community prepares, community intervenes. If it does not, then we must ask, what are we really building? So now I'm forced to ask, if I am visible and still pressured to shrink, if I enter peacefully and leave destabilized. If elders are present and silent, if patterns repeat, what are we calling elderhood? Age is not enough. Experience is not enough. Visibility is not enough. Elderhood without courage is branding, and branding does not protect children. Somewhere right now, there is a flamboyant child in a classroom wondering where everyone went. I will not let them grow up believing they are the first. I refuse to disappear. And if elderhood failed us, then we must rebuild it by the fireside. See you next time.